Well, we've just heard about the impact the Cape floods have had on the Overberg district. At the same time, our country's farmers are grappling with a devastating avian flu outbreak. You know, farmers are used to dealing with tough times, inclement weather, disease, etc., etc. But if it continues at this pace, how secure is our food supply? Because farmers rely on insurance paying out for damaged crops, livestock losses. Can it continue to support these types of losses? I'm joined now by Sonja Dunn. She's head of commercial insurance at Integrisure Brokers. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. You know, when we hear what farmers are dealing with, you know, whether it's the flooding and the impact in some of our sort of agriculture heartlands, or this devastating avian flu, where I think millions of birds have had to be culled by now. I wonder if you could start by just giving me a sense of how, if at all, but I think it is, but how out of the ordinary what's going on in farming circles. How out of the ordinary is it?
Evening, Sally. Thank you very much for having us. We would like to think that it is a once-off, you know, when a pandemic breaks out, it seems very unique to this time, but pandemics have actually been around for a long time. The farmers, I think, are feeling it even more so with the influx of the storms, the fires. I think it's quite astronomical what they're going through. And the fact that they're still surviving is kudos to them. I do think it's not sustainable. I do think they need support. And insurance is obviously your first port of call. Pandemics currently being an exclusion on your general insurance doesn't help them at all. We need to become more proactive, definitely.
Yeah, and of course, I had these conversations during the COVID pandemic with business owners, and there were all sorts of clauses where they actually weren't necessarily covered for a pandemic or a lockdown that was as a result of a pandemic. Hence, there's the small print. But I did not know about pandemics within the agriculture sector. The avian flu outbreak, has it become, is it a pandemic, would you say? Is that how you describe it? What does insurance say about an agricultural pandemic?
100%, it is definitely a pandemic. And most general insurers, they have already written it out of the cover, so you're not going to find it.
Why do they do that? Sorry to interrupt, but why do they write it out?
Because it's almost unaffordable. So a pandemic is going to affect a large number of farmers, where normally an incident is, you know, localized to one or two, and the premiums of many pay for the claims of few. But now with the pandemic, it's on a national level, so the insurers' coffers are only so big. As long as there's money coming in, they can pay claims out. But with the pandemic, it turns it around. So there's just not enough money to go around because the rating needs to be adjusted for a pandemic.
Okay, so am I right that it kind of throws the modelling completely out?
100%, yes, 100%.
Okay. So what would happen if we started getting more and more storms like we've seen in the past few weeks in the Cape? Doesn't that also have a risk of throwing the modelling out, climate change?
100% correct. The modelling will change as the environment changes. So we've seen an influx from insurers adjusting rates. You know, they're excluding certain areas because it's just not viable for them to insure certain areas anymore. You know, when you're talking about the Durban floods and now the Cape Town floods, the insurers need to look very carefully at the exposure within these areas to make sure that they've got a viable solution. It affects the reinsurers. It's a long mathematical equation that needs to be looked at very carefully.
Yeah, of course, and we understand that insurance is a business, but equally the reason people go for insurance is to look after them when things are terrible. If you have too many exclusions, what's the point of insurance? I would imagine this is where innovation has to come in.
You are 100% correct. So insurance is a great solution, and that's what we in the industry here for, but we do need some innovation from non-insurance role players. For instance, the government, they do need to come in and say, how can we support the insurance leg? Because insurance on its own, if we're going to insure every single event, is not going to be affordable. People are going to put up their hands and say, I can no longer afford my premiums because it's just not viable.
But of course, the knock-on of that is a farmer going bankrupt because they haven't been able to insure against these events that may become more frequent. They go out of business. And then what happens to our food supply chain? What happens to our supermarket shelves?
100%. So it affects the farmer, it affects his workers, it affects the supply chain, which includes the people transporting it, the retailers, and of course the end consumer who's going to come to an empty shelf. But a lot of knock-on effects that aren't seen up front is things like market share. If a specific farmer is down due to a pandemic like this, how does he recover from, to get his market share back? That's something that's not even insurable. So the government, along with the industry role players, need to come up with a solution. And there are solutions because overseas people are already doing it. So I feel that we're a bit lacking, we're a bit behind. We need to get our house in order and support our farmers.
So are you saying that these conversations are not yet actually happening with all stakeholders sitting down in South Africa saying, right, this is what other countries are doing, this is what we need to do?
On high level, I think it's happening, but it's not filtering through quick enough. We need it now. Now's the time to support the farmers, not reactively after a situation like this. We should have been ready and geared to go already.
So are you saying that the innovation is really that government has to step in? Because as we know, government doesn't have much money. So what are the other innovations? What are other countries doing?
So they are looking at, you can self-insure a certain portion, but the crux of the insurance for pandemics needs to be made available. Whether it's subsidy from government side, the talks are happening on a high level. But like I say, it doesn't filter through quick enough. The farmers are suffering now already.
So in terms of what's happening at the moment, obviously insurance is tailored to the individual needs of the person who's taking out the insurance. But I would imagine there's some broad rules. If we look at the poultry industry, so you're saying all those farmers have not been insured for the avian flu. They cannot get insurance for it. It's just a loss.
Currently in South Africa, it's an exclusion on the policy, so the avian flu would not be covered. The solutions across the seas it's there, and I think it's a lot more supportive than what we currently have. I think engagement from the role players, the insurers and the reinsurers that we deal with in our South African market needs to happen faster.
So what about insurance? I was just chatting to the mayor of the Overberg, and he was saying that some of those barley crops, some of those wheat crops might be so badly waterlogged that they become of very low value or no value at all. Is that the sort of thing where insurance can still step in?
With regards to the crop side, yes, I think there is ways to mitigate that. With regard to the livestock side of it, I think there's a longer ripple effect because you don't recover in 1 or 2 seasons. It takes a long time to recover from something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the while, we need to keep our food supply chain stable.
Correct.
And up until now, all through the pandemic, our farming communities did an incredible job. But this really looks
100%.
like a very, very heavy burden. Thank you so much. Very interesting insights there. Sonja Dunn, she's head of commercial insurance at Integrisure Brokers.